wiped his hands on his apron, and looked at the pile of vegetables still waiting to be chopped. The kitchen was quiet except for the soft bubbling of soup on the stove and the distant hum of the colony's generator. Most people in New Haven had gone to bed hours ago, but liked working at night. It reminded him of his old military days when he would prep meals for hundreds of soldiers before dawn. The emergency siren started screaming at exactly 11:47 p.m. Paused, his knife halfway through a carrot. The colony's warning system only had 3 settings: weather alert, equipment failure, or hostile contact. This wasn't weather season and the power was running fine. That left one option. All residents report to emergency shelters immediately, the automated voice announced through the speakers. This is not a drill. Unknown vessel has entered our airspace. All residents report to emergency shelters immediately. Set down his knife and walked to the kitchen window. In the distance, he could see lights moving toward the underground bunkers built into the hillside, families running with their children, the security team heading to their defensive positions, everyone following the plan they had practiced dozens of times. A bright light appeared in the sky, growing larger and brighter. The ship was coming down fast, much faster than any human vessel would attempt. Watched as it settled in the main square with impossible smoothness, its hull gleaming like black glass under the colony's lights. The kitchen door burst open. Sarah Martinez, the colony's security chief, ran in wearing her combat gear. "What are you doing? Everyone needs to be in the shelters now." "Someone needs to secure the food stores," said, turning back to his vegetables. "Military protocol, never leave supplies for the enemy. The enemy has ships that can travel between stars. I don't think they're worried about stealing our potatoes." Smiled, "Maybe not, but this is still my kitchen, and I'm not leaving it unsecured." Sarah stared at him for a moment, then shook her head. "You have 15 minutes. Then I'm coming back with a sedative gun and dragging you to the shelter myself." "I'll be fine, Sarah. Go take care of everyone else." After Sarah left, continued his prep work. He had learned long ago that staying busy kept fear away. The routine of chopping, stirring, and seasoning was familiar and calming. Outside, he could hear strange sounds: metal footsteps, electronic chirping, and something that might have been voices but in no language he recognized. The kitchen door opened again, but this time Sarah didn't walk through it. The creature that entered was like nothing had ever seen, even in the wildest science fiction movies. It stood about 7 feet tall on 2 powerful legs, with 4 arms ending in clawed hands. Its body was covered in dark, chitinous plates that seemed to shift and move. The head was elongated, with multiple eyes that glowed like amber gems. When it breathed, could see rows of sharp teeth. The creature's plates expanded outward, making it look even larger. It released something into the air, a smell that made every animal instinct in his body scream at him to run. His heart started racing, and his hands began to shake. But had been a military cook for 12 years. He had served meals during artillery bombardments, alien virus outbreaks, and once during a mutiny when half the crew wanted to space the other half. He had learned to function even when his body wanted to shut down from fear. So he kept chopping vegetables. The creature made a sound that might have been surprise. Its plates shifted back to their normal position. It took a step closer, and when it spoke, the words came out in perfectly clear English. "Human," it said, its voice like gravel grinding together. "Why do you not flee? Why do you not show fear?" Looked up from his cutting board. "Oh, I'm definitely afraid, but I've got about 30 people to feed for breakfast, and this prep work won't do itself." He gestured toward a chair with his knife. "You must be hungry after that long journey. When's the last time you had a proper meal?" The creature tilted its head and could almost see confusion in those glowing eyes. "I am commander of the consumption fleet. I have come to consume your species." "Consume," paused in his chopping, "like eat us." "Consume, devour. Absorb your knowledge and strength. My species has done this across the galaxy for thousands of years. We are the apex predators of space. All species fall before us and become part of us. Nodded thoughtfully. That's a pretty grim way to meet new people, but it explains why you look like you haven't had a decent meal in weeks. All that conquering and consuming probably doesn't leave much time for proper nutrition. I do not understand your words, said. Are you attempting to bargain for your life? Many species try this. None succeed. No bargaining, said, returning to his vegetables. But I've never met anyone from another species before, and my grandmother always said the first thing you do for any guest is offer them food, even unexpected ones. The alien commander stood in the kitchen doorway, clearly not knowing what to do. Whatever responses she had expected from her prey, this wasn't one of them. Moved to the stove and started heating a pan. I'm thinking something protein-heavy for you. You look like a carnivore, but prepared with some techniques you probably haven't experienced. Humans have spent thousands of years learning how to make food taste good, not just provide fuel. You speak of feeding me, said slowly, but I have come to feed upon you. Well, said, adding oil to the pan, we can discuss that over dinner. I find most problems look different on a full stomach. As the kitchen filled with the sound of sizzling and the smell of cooking food, Commander found herself experiencing something entirely new in her long career of conquest. She found herself curious about what dinner would taste like. Watched the human move around the kitchen with practiced efficiency. His movements were smooth and confident, like a warrior preparing for battle, but instead of weapons, he wielded knives that cut vegetables into perfect pieces. The smells coming from his cooking were unlike anything in her experience. How long since you've eaten? Asked, not looking up from the pan where something was browning with a sound that made the air itself seem hungry. I consumed a scout 3 cycles ago, replied automatically, then paused. Why was she answering his questions? She was the predator here. She should be asking the questions. Stopped stirring and looked at her with what might have been concern. 3 cycles. That's what, 3 weeks in standard time. No wonder you look thin. Your species might be tough, but you still need regular nutrition. You do not understand, said, her plates shifting with agitation. The do not eat as other species do. We consume other intelligent beings. We absorb their memories, their skills, their very essence. Each species we devour makes us stronger, smarter, more complete. So you're not just hunters, said, adding more ingredients to his pan. You're collectors. That's actually fascinating from an anthropological perspective, though I imagine it makes dinner conversations pretty awkward. 4 eyes blinked in sequence. Dinner conversations. You know, talking while you eat, sharing stories, getting to know each other. Began chopping fresh herbs and the kitchen filled with bright, green scents. Food brings people together. It's one of the most basic ways humans bond with each other. Bond, the concept was as alien to as her appearance was too. My species does not bond. We conquer. We consume. We become superior. Paused in his chopping. That sounds lonely. The words hit like a physical blow. Lonely. She had never heard the term applied to the before. They were feared across the galaxy. They were powerful beyond measure. They were. She thought of her ship with its sterile corridors and silent crew members. Each served their function efficiently, but they rarely spoke unless duty required it. They had no art, no music, no stories that weren't about conquest. They had absorbed the cultures of 1,000 species, but none of it had become truly theirs. We are not lonely, she said, but the words felt wrong in her mouth. We are strong. You can be both, said gently. Strength doesn't mean you have to be alone. He moved to another stove and began heating water in a large pot. My grandmother used to say that a person's true strength shows in how they treat others, especially those who can't help them back. Your grandmother sounds weak, said, though without her usual conviction. She survived 3 wars, raised 6 children by herself, and could cook a meal that would make grown soldiers cry with joy, replied. She fed everyone who came to her door, no matter who they were or what they'd done. Enemy soldiers, refugees, criminals, she said hunger was hunger, and everyone deserved at least one good meal. Found herself leaning against the kitchen counter, drawn into the strange ritual of watching the human work. His hands moved with the same precision her warriors showed when maintaining their weapons, but his purpose was creation rather than destruction. "Tell me about your species," said, tasting something from a small spoon and adding more seasoning. "What were you like before you became conquerors? What did you eat on your home world?" The question surprised. No prey species had ever asked about culture before. Most were too busy fleeing or begging for mercy. "We were different," she said slowly. "Long ago on our home world we were hunters, but we hunted animals, not sentient beings. We had great forests of crystal trees and rivers that flowed with water so pure it sang when the wind touched it." "What did you hunt?" asked, genuinely interested. "Six-legged creatures called. They were fast and clever with meat that tasted like—" Paused. She had not thought of meat in centuries. "Like sunshine and rain mixed together, sweet and clean and full of energy." "Sounds wonderful. Did you cook it or eat it raw?" "We would roast it over fires made from crystal wood. The smoke would turn purple and make the meat taste even better. Sometimes we would add berries that grew near the singing rivers, or leaves that tasted like starlight." Smiled. "Your people were cooks too then, you just forgot." Plates shifted again, but this time with something other than aggression. "We forgot many things when we took to the stars and began consuming other species. We thought their knowledge was better than our own." "Maybe," said, "but you can't really know something until you make it your own. Here, try this." He held out a spoon with a small amount of sauce on it. Stared at the spoon. In her entire life, no one had ever offered her food. They took what they wanted when they wanted it. This human was freely giving her something he had created. Cautiously, she extended one clawed hand and took the spoon. The sauce was brown and rich, with a smell that reminded her somehow of home, though she couldn't say why. She tasted it carefully. The flavors exploded across her tongue like small stars being born. There was meat, but also things she couldn't identify, sweet things, spicy things, complex combinations that danced together in perfect harmony. It was nothing like the raw essence she absorbed from consumed prey. This was art. "Good?" asked, watching her reaction. Could only nod. She was experiencing something her species had forgotten existed, pleasure that came not from domination, but from appreciation. "I've been thinking about what you told me," continued, turning back to his cooking. "About consuming other species to become stronger. But here's the thing about humans, we've found that we get stronger by working together, not by consuming each other. We share knowledge freely, and somehow everyone ends up smarter." "That is not how strength works," protested, though with less certainty than before. "Isn't it?" asked. "I'm making this meal using techniques from a dozen different Earth cultures. Chinese stir-frying, Italian herbs, French sauces, Indian spices. Each culture developed these methods over thousands of years, and they shared them with us freely. Now I can create something better than any one culture could make alone." As the smells from cooking continued to fill the kitchen, found herself thinking about concepts that had no names in her language. Sharing, giving, creating beauty not for conquest but simply because it could exist. For the first time in her long life, the commander of a consumption fleet wondered if her species might have been wrong about what it meant to be strong. Set 2 plates on the small table near the kitchen window. The larger portion went in front of the chair he pulled out for, while he placed a smaller serving at his own seat. Steam rose from the food, carrying scents that seemed to tell stories of distant worlds and ancient traditions. "What is this?" asked, staring at the plate. She had expected something crude, something that would merely fill her stomach. Instead, she saw food arranged with careful attention to color and form. Dark meat glistened with rich sauce, bright vegetables provided splashes of green and orange, and golden grains formed a perfect foundation beneath it all. "I call it Galactic Welcome," said, settling into his chair. "It's based on what my family used to make for special guests, but I adapted it for what I can observe about your biology. High protein content for a carnivore, but with flavors and textures that might be new to your palate." Remained standing, staring at the offered chair. "I do not understand this ritual." "It's not a ritual exactly," said. "It's just how humans share meals. We sit together, we eat together, we talk together. It turns eating from just fuel into something more." Something more. Community, connection. A way to say you matter to me without using words. Slowly, awkwardly, lowered herself into the chair. Her larger frame made the human furniture seem fragile, but it held her weight. She looked across the table at who had already begun eating his smaller portion. "You eat first," said, noticing her hesitation. "Tell me what you think." Picked up the utensils had provided, though they felt strange in her clawed hands. She cut a piece of the meat and brought it to her mouth. The taste was unlike anything she had ever experienced. When they consumed other beings, they absorbed raw memories and knowledge, but taste was just fuel. This was something entirely different. The meat was tender and rich. The sauce added layers of flavor that seemed to unfold as she chewed, and the spices created a warmth that spread through her whole body. But it was more than just taste. Somehow, she could sense the care that had gone into preparing it. The time spent choosing ingredients, the attention to temperature and timing, the thought given to what she might enjoy. No one had ever created anything specifically for her comfort before. She began, then stopped. Her language had no words for what she was experiencing. "Good, bad, strange?" asked gently. "It tastes like," struggled with concepts her mind had never had to process. "Like someone wanted me to be happy." Smiled. "That's exactly what I was going for." As they ate together, began to talk. Not about military strategy or territory or resources, the usual topics when species met for the first time. Instead, he spoke about small things. How his grandmother had taught him to cook when he was 7 years old. The first time he had prepared a meal for friends and watched their faces light up. The satisfaction of creating something that brought joy to others. "Food is our first language," he said, refilling her glass with clean water. "Before we had words, mothers fed their children. Before we had trade, we shared meals with strangers to show peaceful intent. Every human culture has different foods, but we all understand that feeding someone is an act of love." "Love," repeated, another concept without translation in her tongue. "Caring for someone else's, even when there's no benefit to yourself," explained. "Wanting good things for them just because they exist." Took another bite, thinking about this idea. They cared for their own species, but only because they were useful. A warrior was valued for their strength, a navigator for their skills, a commander for their ability to lead conquests. But this human was treating her well simply because she was hungry. "Why do you show me this kindness?" she asked. "I came here to destroy your people." "Maybe," said, "but you haven't destroyed us. You're sitting here having dinner instead. That tells me there's more to you than just conquest and consumption." "My species would call this weakness." "My species would call it strength. It takes courage to be kind to someone who might hurt you. It takes wisdom to look for the person underneath the monster." Set down her utensils, food half finished. "You think I am a person, aren't you?" The question hung in the air between them. Had always thought of herself as a weapon, a force of nature, an agent of her species' will. But sitting in this warm kitchen, eating food prepared with care, she felt something she had never experienced before. She felt seen. "Tell me about your life," said softly. "Not your conquests or your victories. Tell me about you." And somehow found herself talking. She spoke of the loneliness of command, how she had not had a real conversation in decades, because everyone either feared her or used her for their own purposes. She described the emptiness of absorption, how each consumed species left her with their knowledge but no understanding of what it meant to them. "We become more powerful with each conquest," she said, "but we become less ourselves. I know the mating songs of the crystalline choir, but I have never felt the urge to sing. I understand the mathematical poetry of the geometric minds, but I find no beauty in numbers. We collect everything and understand nothing." Listened without judgment, occasionally asking gentle questions that helped her explore feelings she had never acknowledged. As the meal continued, began to understand what was happening to her. For the first time in her life, she was not taking from another being. She was sharing with them. "My species believes that to be strong, you must make others weak," she said finally. "But you are making me stronger simply by treating me as if I have value." "You do have value," said simply. "Every thinking being does. That's what makes this universe so incredible, all the different ways consciousness can exist and grow." Looked down at her empty plate, then at its kind face. Something fundamental was shifting inside her, like a structure she had never questioned was being rebuilt from the foundation up. "If I do not consume your species," she said slowly, "if I choose not to follow the path of my people, what then?" "Then we figure out what comes next," replied, "together." Outside the kitchen window, the first light of dawn was beginning to touch the horizon. Somewhere in the distance, could hear the other members of her crew beginning to wonder why their commander had not yet reported the successful completion of their mission. But for the first time in centuries, Commander was in no hurry to end a conversation. The sound of ships landing woke most of New Haven just after sunrise. 3 more vessels touched down in the main square, their crews emerging with the confident stride of predators expecting to find a completed conquest. Subcommander Al was the first to reach the colony's kitchen, where he expected to find overseeing the final stages of human consumption. Instead, he found his superior officer sitting at a small table with a human, both of them laughing at something the human had just said. "Commander," Al said, his voice tight with confusion, "what is the status of the consumption protocol?" Looked up at her subordinate, and Al was surprised to see something in her eyes he had never witnessed before. She looked, content. "The protocol has been delayed," said. "We are conducting cultural research." "Cultural research?" Al's plates shifted with agitation. "Commander, our orders were clear. This species is to be consumed within 1 solar rotation." Stood up from the table, wiping his hands on his apron. "You must be hungry after your trip. I was just about to start breakfast for a larger group. Would you like to join us?" Al stared at the human as if he had grown additional heads. "It speaks to me as if we are equals." "Because you are equals," said quietly. "Please, Al, sit, experience this." "I do not understand what has happened here," Al said, but something in his commander's tone made him hesitate. In all his years serving under, he had never heard her sound so peaceful. Was already moving around the kitchen, pulling out additional ingredients. "How many are in your crew?" he asked Al. 12 warriors from my vessel," Al replied automatically, then caught himself. "Why do you ask?" "Because I need to know how much food to prepare," said simply. "Can't have anyone going hungry." As if summoned by the conversation, more began arriving. Subcommander Ra entered with 2 warriors, all of them expecting to find their commander directing the consumption. Instead, they found her helping the human arrange chairs around a larger table. "Commander," Ra said, "the other vessels are requesting status updates. The fleet expects confirmation of successful consumption within the hour." "Tell them the situation is evolving," replied. "And please sit down. You are about to experience something unprecedented." Had transformed the small kitchen into something resembling a restaurant. Additional tables had been brought in from the colony's common areas, and the delicious smells coming from the cooking surfaces were making even the hardened warriors shift uncomfortably as their stomachs responded to unfamiliar stimuli. "I do not understand what sorcery this human practices," Al muttered to Ra. "Commander seems to be under some form of mental influence." "I can hear you," said, not looking up from where she was learning to slice vegetables under patient instruction. "And I assure you, my mind has never been clearer." More continued to arrive, drawn by curiosity about their missing commander. Soon, the expanded kitchen area held nearly 30 of the galaxy's most feared predators, all of them watching in bewilderment as their leader took instruction from a human in the art of food preparation. Moved among them with remarkable calm, setting out plates and utensils, explaining what they were about to experience. Most of them had never seen food prepared fresh before them. Their species consumed prey in its raw form, absorbing not just nutrition but memories and knowledge through biological processes they barely understood themselves. "This is unnecessary ritual," Sub-Commander On declared. "We should complete our mission and report to the fleet." "Sit down," On said, her voice carrying the authority of command. "That is an order." As the meal was served, something extraordinary began to happen. The younger warriors, who had never questioned their species' way of life, found themselves experiencing flavors and sensations that their language had no words for. The food was warm, complex, and somehow comforting in a way that raw consumption never was. "This taste," Warrior said wonderingly, "it is like the crystal fruits from our but somehow better." "The human added spices that complement the natural flavors," explained, surprising herself with how easily the cooking terminology came to her. "It enhances rather than masks the original taste." As the meal progressed, began sharing stories about human culture, about the importance of gathering around food, about how sharing meals had helped human societies grow and prosper. They found themselves drawn into conversations unlike any in their military experience. "On my," Ra said slowly, "we used to gather in great circles when the 3 moons aligned. The elders would share stories while we feasted on the seasonal spawning of the silver swimmers. I had forgotten. We used to have traditions beyond conquest." "All species have traditions," said gently. "Sometimes we just lose track of them when other concerns take over." Sub-Commander Al, who had been silent throughout most of the meal, suddenly spoke up. "Human, what you have done here, this gathering, this sharing of sustenance. My species once called this the bonding feast. We have not practiced in over 1,000 years." "Why not?" asked. "Because we believed it made us soft," Al replied. "We thought individual strength was all that mattered." "But look around this table," said, gesturing to her crew. "Do any of you feel weak right now?" The gathered looked at each other, and for the first time in their military careers, they were truly seeing their fellow warriors not as tools or resources, but as individuals with thoughts and feelings and experiences worth sharing. "I feel stronger," Warrior Al said hesitantly, "but also different, like I am part of something larger than myself." "That's community," explained. "Humans learned long ago that we can accomplish more together than we ever could alone, not through dominance or consumption, but through cooperation and mutual support." Word of the unprecedented gathering began to spread through communication channels. Other ships started arriving, their commanders demanding explanations for the delay in consumption protocols. But each new arrival found themselves pulled into the expanding circle of shared meals and conversation. By midday, the community center of New Haven had been converted into the largest interspecies gathering in galactic history. Over 200 sat at tables alongside the human colonists who had emerged from their shelters, sharing food and stories, and discovering that the beings they had come to consume were not so different from themselves. "Commander," Sub-Commander Ra said as the afternoon wore on, "what do we tell the fleet? They will expect our report soon." Looked around at her transformed crew, at the humans who had welcomed them despite every reason to fear, at who was teaching a group of young warriors how to properly season a sauce. "We tell them the truth," she said finally. "We tell them that we have discovered something more valuable than consumption. We have discovered communion." As the day continued, and more ships arrived to investigate the unprecedented delay, each crew found themselves drawn into the growing celebration of shared food and newfound understanding. For the first time in their species' history, they were growing stronger not by taking from others, but by giving to them. 6 months had passed since the Knight Commander first entered its kitchen, and New Haven looked nothing like the small frontier colony it had once been. The settlement now sprawled across several valleys, filled with structures that represented the architectural styles of dozens of different species. The morning air carried the sounds of multiple languages being spoken, the clatter of cooking implements, and the laughter of beings who had once been mortal enemies sharing breakfast together. Stood on the observation deck of what had once been the colony's emergency command center, now converted into the Galactic Cultural Exchange Center. Below him, the morning market was in full swing. Warriors worked alongside human farmers, selling vegetables grown with techniques that combined Earth agriculture with advanced alien soil enhancement. Crystalline choir members harmonized while they baked bread, their musical mathematics creating perfect texture and flavor. Former enemies now competed to see who could create the most innovative fusion dishes. "The morning report's first cook," said, approaching with a tablet full of data. She had adapted well to her new title, one created specifically for her role as the first to embrace the philosophy of communion over consumption. Smiled at the formal address, despite their friendship, insisted on maintaining some protocols. "How many new arrivals today?" 17 ships from 8 different species, she replied. "The hexagonal minds have sent their first diplomatic vessel. They're curious about reports that they have somehow become peaceful." "Peaceful," mused. "I'm not sure that's the right word. You haven't stopped being warriors. You've just found better things to fight for." Through the large windows, they could see construction crews working on the addition to the settlement, a massive community center designed to accommodate the dietary and social needs of over 40 different species. Engineers worked alongside human architects and plasmawalker technicians to create something that had never existed before, a truly universal gathering space. "The reports from other colonies are encouraging," continued. "The communion centers we've established on 12 worlds are all showing positive results. Species that have been at war for centuries are actually sitting down to share meals together." Nodded, though his expression remained thoughtful, "and the resistance?" "Growing, but manageable," admitted. "Admiral Ox has declared our entire movement a corruption of principles. His faction controls about 30% of the fleet, and they've gone deeper into unconquered territory to avoid contamination from our influence." "Change is never easy," said, "especially for species that have built their entire identity around conquest, but we knew this wouldn't happen overnight." A chime from the communication system interrupted their conversation. The holographic display activated, showing a familiar face, though one that had changed considerably since first met him. Subcommander Al said, his image flickering slightly due to the distance. He was transmitting from the newly established communion center on Rigel 7. "You're going to want to see this." The display expanded to show a wide shot of what appeared to be the largest gathering in galactic history. Thousands of beings from dozens of species filled a massive amphitheater, all seated at tables arranged in concentric circles. At the center, representatives from species that had been at war for generations were working together to prepare a feast using traditional foods from each culture. The Burning Sands Empire and the Ice Worlds Coalition agreed to a formal peace treaty this morning, Al continued, barely able to contain his excitement. "They said that any species that could share a meal could share a future. We're calling it the Treaty of Shared Tables. Felt a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with the morning sun. When he had first offered dinner to a terrifying alien commander, he never could have imagined it would lead to this. "That's 17 peace agreements this month," said, making notes on her tablet. "The Council of Species is actually starting to take our movement seriously." "Speaking of which," Al said, "you should prepare for more visitors. The Eternal Librarians have announced they want to document our unprecedented social experiment, and the Time Weavers are sending observers to study how quickly cultural change can propagate across galactic distances." After ending the communication and walked through the settlement toward the central kitchens. Along the way, they passed sights that still amazed. Young learning traditional Earth cooking techniques from elderly human grandmothers. Human children playing games taught to them by warriors from species once considered invincible. Former enemies sharing recipes like family secrets. In the main kitchen, the day's preparation was all ready for the evening's Galactic Harvest Festival, a celebration that had grown from simple desire to cook for his unexpected guest into a monthly event that attracted visitors from across the galaxy. 15,000 confirmed attendees for tonight, announced Sarah Martinez, who had traded her security chief uniform for the role of event coordinator. "We've got delegations from 37 species, including first-time visits from the Shadow Dancers and the Probability Worms." "Any special dietary requirements I should know about?" asked, automatically falling into his old routine of checking supplies and preparation schedules. The probability worms exist in multiple quantum states simultaneously, so they need food that's been prepared in several different ways at the same time, Sarah replied with the matter-of-fact tone of someone who had become accustomed to impossible logistics. "And the shadow dancers only consume things that have never been touched by direct light, so we'll need to prepare their portion in the new dark matter kitchen." As the day progressed and preparation for the evening's festival continued, found himself reflecting on how much had changed. The simple act of offering a meal to a stranger had somehow grown into a movement that was reshaping galactic civilization. The evening festival was, as always, a wonder to behold. Beings who had spent as enemies sat together, sharing not just food but stories, technologies, art forms, and dreams for the future. Though once the galaxy's most feared predators, had become its most enthusiastic ambassadors for peace through hospitality. As the night wound down and the last guests began to depart, found himself back in the original kitchen where it all began, cleaning up alongside, and a dozen other volunteers from various species. "Do you ever regret it?" asked as she carefully washed delicate crystal serving bowls donated by the Singing Mountains people. "Your species could have stayed hidden, stayed safe. Instead, you opened your door to monsters and changed everything." Considered the question as he put away the last of the cooking implements. Outside the window, he could see the lights of ships from dozens of worlds, their crews staying overnight before continuing on to spread the message of communion to other corners of the galaxy. "My grandmother used to say that the only way to defeat a monster was to help them remember they're not a monster at all," replied. "You were never really monsters. You were just hungry for connection, for purpose, for something to fill the empty spaces that conquest never could." "And now," smiled as he hung up his apron, the same one he had been wearing that first night when fear and curiosity had walked into his kitchen disguised as a terrifying alien commander. "Now we're all just people sharing a meal," he said, "and somehow that's changing the universe one dinner at a time." Above them, the stars shone down on a galaxy that was slowly learning that the greatest strength came not from consuming others, but from creating something beautiful together. And in kitchens across 1,000 worlds, the simple human tradition of sharing food was growing into something that even the species had never imagined possible. The recipe for peace, it turned out, had been there all along. It just took one cook brave enough to offer dinner to a monster to show the galaxy how to make it.